Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the Craig and Jane Show. Today we're doing our show from home because we haven't got Matt with us today. So I hope you can all hear me and hear Jane. This is a new setup, so it's been working with the wrong microphones, the wrong camera, and the wrong tables, but we've managed to get a show together, we think. So tonight we're talking about all sorts of things associated with ancestry, about our heritage. We can ask about social questions about it. We're going to talk about things like reincarnation and things like that. What Jane and I have also had a DNA test to see what our ancestry is. We're going to share that with you. Some of the stories from our family trees and things like that. So stay with us, guys, and welcome to the show. Let's get up the. I'm doing it all myself tonight, so let me just put up the titles. Where's it gone? All right, welcome to the Craig and Jane Show. Well, there we are, guys, ready for interesting talk, I think, tonight, because what do you think about it, Jane? This is quite an interesting topic,
interesting
isn't it?
if I could say hello.
Well, yeah, say hello.
Thank you.
First.
Thank you. So humble.
Well, I have to do an introduction first so that people understand what we're here to talk about tonight, and so that you can join. It looks like you can all hear us because you're all saying hellos and things now. I'll put a couple of hellos up on the screen as you're talking, actually. So, yeah, hello there from New Jersey.
Who's from New Jersey? Deborah.
Couple of hearts there.
That's nice.
Oh, you enjoyed that one, did you? You'll see us both looking in different directions because we've got monitors all over the place tonight. And
Barbara.
hello from Florida.
Barbara. Linda.
Please cheer us up.
Yeah.
There we go. We've got lots of you coming in tonight. I'll just stick a few up there. So I'm going to do all the controls and everything tonight as well. So it'll be a bit Keith Robinson tonight. But yeah, so where do we start with all this? I think it's the theme of the show is kind of about, you know, as you wanted to kind of do this tonight, didn't you?
Well,
So,
I think most people want to know, where do I come from? They want to know about their ancestors, and because it has been proven that for people that are given organs that have died, Craig, sometimes they take that perception on of that person that lived. So I find that really interesting in DNA. What do you think?
This is quite interesting because, you know, when we think about who are we, you know, because it's a big question and a debate nowadays, isn't it? Because particularly with all the conflicts that are going on today as we speak, that all the people out rioting in London and places like that. A lot of the debate about all this, isn't it, is about heritage in some ways. You know, one thing, for example, that, you know, and I don't really want to go down this route really, but people ask, what is it to be British? Are you British if you've just been born here? Or are you British if you're from Anglo-Saxon heritage and you go right back and your family tree goes back a long way? So we often identify ourselves first and foremost, don't we, with the idea of my physical body, my physical heritage, my lineage here, my ancestral tree is important to people. You know, wherever you come from, whatever nation on earth you come from, and whatever your lineage, as it were, is obviously of interest to you, isn't it? So I think it might be interesting just to talk about that a little bit first, because I think there's some quite interesting things in our own, you know.
Well, do you want to talk about our DNA?
Well, that's what I thought. We can talk a little bit about that. And then also the other thing I think it might be interesting to talk about, and you know, you guys have your questions and your answers too, because you might have some interesting answers. But I'll start doing your questions and things in a moment as we just have a chat about it first. But also, we're a physical body, and that's what we're associated with. But we're also a spiritual beings, aren't we, too? So how about our group souls and our lineage in that line? Do we have a spiritual lineage? And also, I think I'm intrigued with the thought of it. Are the two things somehow corresponding? Does our physical lineage, our DNA, somehow synchronize or resonate also with our past life heritage, as it were? You know, so who are we? Where do we come from? And what makes us us? But yeah, we can have a chat about first of our own background, then, because people might be interested. Have you got any mediums in your family tree?
Well, I've got a very famous, I know a relative that goes back, who's, you know who it is, Craig?
Who are you talking? You think you're talking about Russell Wallace now?
Yeah,
You
Russell
forgot the
Wallace.
name, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I didn't get the name. I'm just testing him. Because my grandmother's name was Wallace, and going right back, she came from the Forsyths. Wallace and Forsyth. So he was the famous person that discovered all about evolution and everything, and then we had others that jumped on it. And funny enough, when I look at his profile and his photograph, he looks identical to my second brother, and I find that quite intriguing. And that's why I suppose we really had our DNA done to find out, because I'm a great believer in past lives and karmic actions. And I've always been intrigued with Russia. I've always wanted to go to Catherine's palace and the Tsars, which we did manage to do in this lifetime, didn't we, Craig? And then it showed up on my DNA.
Well, you've always been intrigued by Eastern European things in a lot of ways, with Russia particularly. I mean, you've got books on the Tsars and things like that that's always intrigued you, haven't you? And you're also quite interested in Nordic things up to a point. We went to a Viking festival recently.
Skål, Craig, skål.
In fact, let's just stick a little picture up here, because we went, and I just got a little picture of Jane when we dressed up to go to Viking festival. You guys might find it interesting.
You've got a better one. Is there a better one?
I haven't got any video clips of it, so beware.
So when we checked out Jane's ethnicity, it turns out she's got quite a lot of interesting things in her family. You've got 50% English.
Yes.
You've got 32% Scandinavian.
Yes.
You've got 9.3% Irish, with a bit of Welsh thrown in, and Scottish, and you've got 7%, which is a small amount, but it looks big on the actual diagram, of Eastern European.
Yes.
So that makes me wonder, doesn't it? Because when we don't know your full family roots back, and we've not traced your family tree back far. But I think it's quite interesting that you've got that. I call Jane's leg, and so I think it's the gypsy in there.
Well, I'll
Romania.
curse you in a minute.
That's where you get your skills from. That's where you love. That's where you love glittery things. It's
No,
all
that
those
comes from
things coming
India.
from.
That's a past incarnation from India.
I think that's a past life thing. Yeah.
India.
So I thought that's quite interesting. So these are only sort of like the cheapy version of the DNA. I think you can do. This was done with saliva, and I think you can do a blood version as well, which would be interesting, because you'll get further back. Because in my family tree, they've always said in our family that we've got Moroccan blood in our family, because Southampton, where I was born from, and most of my family tree goes back. That used to get raided by the Barbary pirates.
I would say you were more barbarians.
Yeah, from Morocco and from Algeria and that. They used to raid the south coast and rape the women, and the family line of the Parkers had Algerian blood in it, but it didn't show up on mine. And here's me. Yeah, and I was talking to my Welsh friend. It was quite funny, because he said, Craig, and here's my results, you're more Welsh than I am, because you'll notice I haven't got any English. I'm not English. I've got 57% Scandinavian, 22% Irish, Scottish and Welsh, and 20% North and Western Europe. And there's me saying we should leave Europe and we should go do Brexit. And I'm not even English, not in that sense.
Well,
anyway.
I would have thought you, from past incarnation, had German blood.
That's it's likely to be German blood in that, actually. But they're pretty vague, these things, actually, and they can do a lot more. And when you trace your family tree back, you dig up all sorts of interesting things.
Don't forget, Craig, that sometimes the lines are broken up. Sometimes we might go right back, and there might be somebody being put in a workhouse, or somebody who's illegitimate, and it breaks all lines up. So that probably is where the confusion comes in.
Yeah, well, we're all I think the fact is, we all go on about ethnicity and nationhood and everything, but I think it's quite interesting to get your heritage, or whatever you want to say. I don't know what this DNA test would be called. Get it done, because it's quite interesting, because you start to think, hey, just a minute, we're all mixes. All of us are from different background somewhere or another, you know. And it's quite interesting to see where your roots come from in many respects, and how much we associate with that idea that we are our DNA in many ways, our physical body. Anything else was interesting that threw up in your family tree? I mean, I thought the mediumistic idea is interesting because there was mediumship on the Irish side of my family, which makes me wonder whether, you know, perhaps I inherited, if we do inherit mediumistic, I don't know if that is the case.
Well,
But with my grandmother on the Irish side,
associated with the banshees.
Yeah. But I don't have a propensity to drink all the time. Yeah. So what's wrong with me? But I got a lot of Irish ways there, I think. You know? But, so I was kind of surprised. I know my great grandma came from Cork, so it's quite interesting when you go back. One of the most interesting ones, I think I put this up early, actually, the video, because we've got a little video here today. One of the most interesting ones in my family tree came when we look back to, we found on we knew it in the family story had been said, but my father checked the family tree carefully, and so did my Uncle Keith. But my granddad, his cousin was a cabin boy on the a ship called the Mignonette that was sunk at sea. And Edgar Allan Poe wrote a fascinating story about it, unknowing that he was writing about this, because Edgar Allan Poe saw the future, we think, in this story that I'm going to put up for you in a moment. He was amazing guy, Edgar Allan Poe, had some pretty weird prophecies for people, but he made a really grisly and quite horrible prophecy about our family. And so maybe this is where some of the prophecy thing comes down the family line somewhere. Maybe it was a curse from Edgar Allan Poe. But I'm going to show you this strange little story now. I went out round Pear Tree Churchyard and around places in Southampton to see this. I'll let the video explain it, and we can talk a little bit about it afterwards if you guys find it interesting. So let's give me a moment, because it's not instant now when I do this, but let's make sure I get the video file, get the correct one. Of course, you don't find it straight away now. It's changed its position. There we go. So today we're at the Itchen, the River Itchen in Southampton. This is Woolston, where my relatives go right back to the 16th century. We actually were the ferrymen that used to row the people across the water here. Now, I'm going to tell you the story of Richard Parker and our connection in the family with Edgar Allan Poe. And some really gory stuff is going to come up in this story. So if you don't like that type of thing, turn off now. And if you're watching this video, something weird could happen to you once you hear this story. Now, most of you have heard about Edgar Allan Poe. He was a really bizarre sort of guy and wrote some of the most strange stories of all time, and he was way ahead of his time. And he had a strange life himself, actually. He was an orphan. His parents died when he was 4 years old, so he had a lot of kind of hang-ups. He lived a life of real poverty as well, grinding poverty, and was one of the first authors ever, the first author, they say, American author. So first that was self-sustaining, you know, he lived it as a professional career. And one of his first novels, I think it was his only novel actually, was called Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. Okay, it was a story of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It was a weird sort of story, really. It's about a shipwreck that went wrong, and the 4 crew had to abandon the ship and were basically stuck on a raft. And because they were running out of food, all they could catch was a turtle, and they caught the turtle and carved it up and ate it. And gradually one of the people on the ship, on the boat, was dying. So they thought, well, we're going to kill him and eat his body. So they cut his hands and feet off for some reason in the story and throw those overboard, and then Grizzly's tale in great detail of eating the body of the boy. Now the boy's name in that story was Richard Parker. Remember that name, because that's going to come up again in a minute. Now, Poe wrote the story of Arthur Gordon Pym, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket in 1838. So it was quite a weird story to write in that time. But many people thought that Poe had this ability to see the future. He actually believed he could see the future himself, and believed that he was kind of
constantly in a state of seeing things that were going to happen. And in one of his short stories, Eureka, he actually talked about the idea of the expanding universe, and lots of the ideas that he came up with often came to true in science and all sorts of things. He's a really, really weird bloke. He had all sorts of strange fears too, like a fear of premature burial, for example. So Poe, in this story, we believe was seeing the future. Now, my cousin, Nigel Parker, spotted in this story of Poe a very similar thing to what happened in real life nearly 50 years later. So Poe in this story foresaw something that was going to happen, and my cousin Nigel Parker spotted the story and sent it to a man called Arthur Koestler. Now, Arthur Koestler was a very famous paranormal investigator in his time. Koestler set up the chair of parapsychology in Edinburgh University. And Koestler saw this and seized upon this idea because what he spotted in this was a very, very weird coincidence. And it's the coincidences in this story that are even more remarkable than the strange premonitions that Edgar Allan Poe had. Now we're going to go and see if we can find the grave of one of my family members here in Pear Tree Churchyard near Woolston in Southampton. So this is Pear Tree Church, and in the graveyard, I believe it's just around the corner there, there's the gravestone of my grandfather's cousin, it was, whose name was Richard Parker. And a very strange thing happened to him that actually mimicked the story that Edgar Allan Poe had described 50 years earlier. Let's go and have a look and I'll tell you all about it. Okay, let me tell you about Richard Parker. You remember he was in the story of Edgar Allan Poe in his book that he wrote 50 years before these events I'm about to tell you happened. Now, Richard Parker was my granddad's cousin. And as a young man, he ran to sea like they all did. My granddad ran to sea, many of them in this area of Woolston, went off in the boats to Southampton. Now, Richard Parker went off as the cabin boy at the age, I think he was 17 when he went to sea, and he went on a boat that was heading for Australia. It was owned by a millionaire Australian. He wanted to get the boat there. It was a sort of yawl, they described it as, a sort of a smallish boat, 4 crew including him. And on the way to Australia, it got into trouble in the South Atlantic seas, and the boat started to fall to bits, so they decided they had to get off the boat pretty quick. So they all jump into the life raft. Now, the life raft could take the 4 men, but it had no supplies. So they told Richard Parker, go on, you go in, lad, and get some water while we get the rest of it done. So he went to get water and ended up bringing in 2 tins of turnips. He couldn't get water. And the rest of the crew, who was Captain Dudley, someone called Stevens, and someone called Brooks, all 4 of them get onto the boat. And then it gets into trouble. And they start sailing out into the South Atlantic, and gradually, over many, many days, they start to starve and, most importantly, die of thirst. Now, Richard Parker, it was known that you must not drink seawater, but Richard Parker drank some of the seawater. Actually, Stevens drank some of it as well, but he began to get into more and more of a comatic state, you know, and the sailors between them started to say, now, you know, how are we going to survive this? So Captain Dudley, who was a very sort of moral and upright sort of man as far as I understand, he was really debating this in his conscience about what to do. He had a lot of religious background to him as well. He decided that we should draw lots and decided one of us should die. Now this is almost a mimic of the story that happened in the story by Edgar Allan Poe, because They drew lots in the Edgar Allan Poe story. They also, the only food that they got was a turtle, and they divided up a turtle, just like in the Edgar Allan Poe story. And they drew lots to see if one of them would die and be eaten. So the 3 other sailors decided to eat Richard Parker, mainly interested in his blood because they were dying of thirst, which they poured into a bucket and drank from the bucket, rather than eating his body. So this kind of story has many other aspects to it, but it's kind of haunted our family history. I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute about what happened after they were picked up by an aptly named boat called the SS Montezuma. Oh, well, that was quite an interesting thing. He's going to get the key so we can have a look at the original stone. And as I was saying, they were so embarrassed about this whole idea that their family had been connected with this story, this is the Dudleys, that they decided to put a fund up so the gravestone could be looked after forever. And actually Dudley, who was the captain, you remember, he was the captain who decided to draw the straw so that they could eat Richard Parker. He went off, after they did all the trials and things like that, he went off to Australia and he lived as a sort of a beachcomber. And they say he went completely bonkers and lived, I used to call him Cannibal Tom, because it was Tom Dudley. And he used to wander the beaches in a sort of wild state, stories said. So yeah, so Edgar Allan Poe saw all this happen all those years before, 50 years before. So many little details that were true in this story that keep coming out. And what a strange coincidence to actually meet somebody who actually remembers the Parker family in this area. Oh, thanks, yeah. Yeah, this has been 1833. This has been the sort of time of Poe, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I was telling them about the Poe story and how Edgar Allan Poe foresaw it all in his book, in the narrative of the Reverend Davies. I bet perhaps he was the man that buried him. Look at him. He looks a weird character, isn't he? So we're going to have a look at the gravestone itself. Thanks. So you get a lot of the law students come out to see it then?
They don't come in. They've got a lot of emails. I get a lot of emails from them. So they...
Oh, here it is. Yeah, okay, yeah. Now, so I remember, even that's been cleaned up. Because last time I saw it, it had ants all over it.
And had a huge crack.
Crack was in 2 pieces, wasn't it?
So...
Yeah, and it doesn't say quite as much on there. It doesn't mention cannibalism, does it? Because the that era, they didn't want to mention that. No, everybody ignored it. And it just said, what did it say? Though he slay me, I trust in him. Though he slay me, I trust in him. So he's been murdered. Law laid not this sin upon their charge, to that sin to their charge in Acts. Yeah, so, you know, so there was talk of sin even in the grave, wasn't there? Well, that was really fortuitous that someone should be there that actually understood the story and knew all about it and could show us the stone and so forth. But when he gave me his email address so I could send him a link to this video, he cut his hand and there was blood all over the paper. So he actually signed his email address in blood. The strange coincidences with this story never cease.
Well, that was interesting.
Ghastly, isn't it? Fancy you drinking someone's blood and hurting them.
I mean, it was a real strange story. The fact that there goes Edgar Allan Poe writing it all those years before like that, you know, and they, you know, it made me think that in the Bible and Deuteronomy and things like that, and Exodus, I think it's in, they talk about the sins of the fathers will be laid upon the children's 3 generations. So he's more than 3 generations away from me, hopefully. But it's funny how the legacy of that, I mean, that story there that you saw there was the only sort of real small part of the number of really weird synchronizations that happened. You know, I put that story into 14 Times, which is a magazine all about weird coincidences and things. And afterwards, loads of letters came in, and there was all sorts of weird coincidences that happened to people who saw the story and listened to the story, and then went out, and there was some odd reference to cannibalism or Richard Parker and so forth. And time after time after time, if ever we revisit this story, something weird happens. And I covered a few of them in there anyway. But it makes you wonder, do you think that we have some connection with our ancestors in a more than genetic way? Is there some spiritual connection? And does bad luck, for example, run down through families? I mean, I was thinking, because I think families can create, like family money can sometimes carry bad energy, can't it? And I wondered about Prince Harry, for example, because he's kind of, in a way, could he have been kind of, with all the way of his negative thoughts, being putting curses perhaps on the royal family? You think about it. Charles got cancer, Kate got cancer, Philip died.
I don't think so.
We had all the exposure with all the way down. Could it not be that sometimes that you put a curse, and a curse can run down a family lineage, a bit like the way perhaps Richard Parker's soul there was perhaps calling out to want to be heard? So what do you guys think? You got any questions? Got any answers to these things? Any thoughts? Put them in the comments, and we'll stick some of your things up on the screen. Now let's have a look what some of you got here.
Yeah,
saying.
I think most important, let's answer some questions, Greg.
Yeah, well, we've got a few questions coming up. My great-grandfather came from Ireland, but the family originally went to Ireland in the 1600s. He most likely didn't have much genuine Irish in him. You also got the Cornish, haven't you, agility bits? And that a lot of the Irish went down through Cornwall. And I think in my family tree also, I believe there was Welsh miners that went down through and did the tin mines.
In Ireland, they had a lot of the potato family as well, didn't they?
Yeah, well, a lot of them moved all over the place.
What's this now? I was born in London, many Irish came there. They did, didn't they? And they went to New York.
Yeah, and another one says that she says also she thinks she's got her mediumistic side comes from the Irish roots. I mean, you wonder, have others think that? Do
Celtic.
they?
Yeah, Celtic.
I mean, the Scottish seers, also the Celtic thing, that was a major thing in the Highlands there, the idea of the Scottish seers. The Irish had the seers, and also the old in Cornwall and places
makes
too.
You wonder,
it was all
when they're really into leprechauns and things like that, because my favourite film is Darby O'Gill, The Little People, with Sean Connery.
And of course, the Scandinavians have some pretty fascinating things as well. Like
trolls.
There's one coming up now. I have to see if I can read it for us. What I would like to explore is why I feel so drawn to Great Britain, Ireland, Scotland. Maybe ancestry from some past lives.
Well, it'd be good for her to explore that, wouldn't it? I think personally it's better to have a blood DNA.
Yeah, but maybe it's not in the blood. Maybe it's also from past lives that people have lived here. Because I think, I always feel that, because I've got such an interest in India, and that I'm convinced, and I think you feel the same about your past lives too, that I've definitely had lives in India, because I can remember things from ancient India.
That does answer that. That's why you're starving in this life.
Yeah, I'm hungry all the time. But I don't like curry. But then the Indians don't really eat curry. That's more of a Bangladesh thing. But I kind of have a draw to it. And I think in answer to Lydia, is it? Because we have got only small. So Lydia's question that perhaps there was something from a previous life, Lydia. Perhaps it was. Don't you think?
Yes.
Because if you think about what is it that draws you, why are you drawn to the?
Well, she's got beautiful hair. She looks she's got Irish blood in her, I would say.
Or maybe it's from your genes too.
Yeah, she seems that she's got a lot of Irish in her.
And I also wonder, another thing I think is quite interesting to explore as an idea as well, is if we had a past life that was really dominant in us, would that past life also come out in our genetics? So, for example, people who've had had felt they've had past lives under hypnosis, they describe being burnt alive and things like that. And then in this life, they carry that condition on, for example, like an eczema condition or skin condition, that we carry in our bodies echoes of past lives. So if that was the case and we could carry these echoes of past lives in our body, Could it also be that we even carry it in our DNA, and that our DNA is somehow connected with the spirit and reflects the spirit? I know the DNA is a pure physical chemical thing, it's just a chemistry, but is it also possible that somehow the spirit influences the DNA? Because, you know, people like Russell Wallace and people like Richard Dawkins and Darwin and all the rest of them say everything is done by selectiveness, that what the strong survive, the genes that are good carry on, the DNA that's useful for survival carries on. But could it also be that our mental and our spiritual element, because, you know, we know the spirit world exists, you know it as fact, but couldn't it be that the spirit also influences the physical DNA of the body?
Possibly. I mean, when Dawkins talks about genes, is there a good gene for good behaviour?
And well, there's this behaviour is also a thing that's carried on in genes, isn't
And
it?
it makes you wonder, when we're talking about, like, at the moment, these riots going on in London, what makes people do these things? Is it something from a past life in their genes, whether in that past life were they fighting and something brought it through in this life?
Well, here's an interesting one,
Yeah.
another one with a Viking interest. Kimberly's saying, I can read it from here if you like to. Apparently, according to 23andMe, my ancestors were buried in a Viking ship that was on the island of Salmoa, close to Finland. There's a YouTube documentary about it. According to 23andMe, what do you mean by 23andMe?
We live at 23.
Yeah, that's a lucky number. My ancestor. So I don't know if you got that from your family tree then, but that's interesting, isn't it? Your ancestor. How would you know that? That wouldn't be in the records, would it? And or was this as past life memory you're talking about, Kimberly? But yeah, it's interesting too, because, you know, I'm also very interested in Carl Jung, who was the psychologist, or who talked about the unconscious mind, that all of us carry these what he called archetypal symbols, that we all have similar dreams that go back to ancient times, so that all the ancient memories that we've had from all the millions of years that we've been here are all being somehow passed along in this thing called the collective unconscious. And that sometimes fires and things like that have a certain draw and appeal to us, because we instinctively, this time in our behavior, perhaps not in our reincarnations, but perhaps in our very DNA, are drawn to attract to all those things that used to happen in the olden days. You know, the fire, marching with the fire torches, the burning of the Viking boats, the horrors of warfare, the magical understanding of what is the dawn when it comes up. You know, all those things echo back actually in our bodies to make us think about what ancient times, you know. And I think also in the past lives and reincarnation as well. So when we think about who we are and where we've come from, is an amazing mix, really, isn't it? It's an amazing mix of both the physical body, which we're inheriting perhaps memories from, and also from the spiritual world where we've been to before, and previous lives we had, maybe even on other planets, including this one. And also how all this kind of connects, like a family tree in the physical life. But is that family tree in the physical life also a reflection of things that happened in previous lives?
But you must always
Group souls.
must always look for the evidence. It can't be all sort of fantasy, right?
But how would you find the evidence for these? Is there any evidence for these things?
There is, up to a point.
A lot of people can go right back in the family tree and take it there. I've done some form of regression and gone back as further back for a gentleman, you know, I'm talking about the 14th century. And I told him to go to a certain place, a gravestone, and he actually went there to Brittany and he found the evidence.
Oh yeah, you actually told him this was clairvoyant, sort of giving him a clairvoyant reading to take through about his past lives, and he was able to check it out, and it was exactly as it said. So, you know, that's interesting. The other way is hypnotic regression too, can be very, very interesting. Way I was hypnotically regressed, and I was more interested in what other people were saying around me, because this had a whole room of people that were all being taken back, hypnotized, and then watched by somebody while they talk about their previous lives. and someone would then interview them once they were back and ask them. And someone that I went with was speaking in Old French, and I know the person could not speak French, let alone Old French. And they was talking with Old French language and talking about this life in Old France. But I knew they didn't have any knowledge of French language, which I thought was absolutely remarkable, that they could speak another language.
The children are very good. Remember you met a young boy that came up to you and he told you about his past life, and his mother said, where were we? In Margaret Cove. That young boy, about 8, and he was convinced who he was. His mother said he kept on, but he just came up to you randomly, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And he said he wanted to tell me about his past life. That I'd lived here before, and I used to, what was he saying? Something about he was a knight or something, wasn't he? And the territories were his, and we were linked to the king, and I owned all this land, you know. And so it's so interesting. So there's another one, I think, there. Bad luck is a frequency. Also, there can be people who have signs of energetic contracts. So I think what you're saying there is, it is hard for people to type sometimes, if you're on a phone or something particularly, that perhaps there's some energetic links between us all, you know, that we pass down.
We're all energy, aren't we? Every living thing has energy, doesn't it? The trees, plants have energy.
You know, we're all energetically linked, aren't we?
But energy, what I think they're talking about is DNA. And because some people say, who am I? Where have I come from? Why am I here? What's my purpose?
Also, this is another, just going back to the Richard Parker story here. I see Nadia saying here, really interesting story. Richard Parker is in the life of Pi. And that was another weird coincidence, actually, because the film The Life of Pi reflects that same story of the Richard Parker story. The boy is eaten there, and there's the evil Richard Parker tiger. But there's a scene there. When I was watching, I thought, I've got to look for the Richard Parker stuff, and there must be. And as the boat goes down leaves the dock, there's another ship that's Martha. And I was looking at the ship names, and on the ship side it said, just on the corner of the camera, Mignonette. And it was the Mignonette was the boat that was that sank on the way to Australia. And also, when I did that story too, I put it up on the web some years ago on a bit more of a not such a good quality video. And I had the people from Australia contact me who were the Dudleys, who Cannibal Tom they used to call him, because Dudley went crazy in Australia, and they used to call him Cannibal Tom. He was the one that ate Richard Parker. He emigrated to Australia and became a sort of just a drifter on the beaches and things like that. What do they call them? But anyway, he was living on the beaches and things like that. And they used to call him Cannibal Tom. But he did have some family, and the family got in touch and said the stories there that they had to live down the story of Cannibal Tom, you know. And they like that gravestone. They used to have to clean it at the dead of night. It was so embarrassing. The money had been left for the story. It was a huge story in the Victorian times. I suppose Victorian-y sort of times. Let's see. So you find that quite interesting, guys. It looks like I just put a few of you. So you've come from Cornwall, and lots of Irish people connecting in here. Irish nearly everywhere in the world. Yeah. Let's kind of come down this list a little bit now, because I haven't got anybody helping me. So do try to, if you don't mind, guys, keep it to questions rather than chatting amongst yourself. It's not a chat room. Please use it as a way to sort of see these questions. It makes it easier for me. So please don't chat amongst yourselves if you're going to. Okay.
A lot of Indian people pray to their ancestors.
Well, they believe in the ancestors.
Because it's very important, and like the empires, it's very important who you are, where you come from. I always think it doesn't matter where you come from, it's where you're going to in life. Yeah,
that's important. A lot of the Chinese people that come to me, I do a lot of readings for Chinese people, and that they really do feel a very strong connection with the ancestors. They I mean, in China, they will, some, not all China, but some, and quite still continues in China, you burn money and send it to the ancestors. So you actually buy spirit money, a bit like Monopoly money you burn, that can be spent in the spirit world.
I have a lot of Chinese clients that give me red envelopes for money.
That's it, and they often, the red's lucky, you see, but they would burn, and they would
in order that grandma has gone to spirit and she likes having a TV, they would even do things like burn TVs on bonfires and things, so that it could go into the spirit world. It's obviously China's lost a lot of its old traditions now, but it still goes on.
It's a bit like the Egyptians, wasn't it? Cats were sacred, and when people had to go to the afterlife, they would put food in the coffins and so many things in gold to take over to the afterlife.
Yeah. Well, I mean, throughout history, we've all obsessed about the afterlife, really, and what lies beyond. It's one of the biggest and most important questions we could ask. And I suppose each culture has approached it in a different way.
How blessed people that come back from the spirit world, because you think the universe is vast, that can actually connect with that person. Because people think if you go to a medium, it comes through straight away. It doesn't work like that, does it?
No, and I think actually when you think about it, mediumship answers so many of these questions that have intrigued mankind for such a long time. Because, I mean, the Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. The Chinese, there was talking about sending the money over there, all the countries of the world. But mediumship changes everything, actually. And that's why it is such a precious gift, isn't it?
Yes.
Because it's an incredible thing. Because when we do mediumships, we don't just sort of say, I've got the god Thor here or something. We actually give proof and say things to people that only that person that communicating from the spirit world would be able to tell them. So it gives what we call evidence. So it's kind of a bit like scientific in a way, in that we can give evidence and proof to prove that life continues in the spirit world. And actually, most of the history since before spiritualism didn't really have that methodology to be able to actually prove through evidence. So spiritualism was a very, very powerful and important thing. You know, I've just got another one up here, which has been on the screen for a bit, so I better answer her. Sharon's saying, well, that's all right. We're just, I had a past life reading done last year, and it was so interesting. I've always been attracted to castles, and that was the first thing that was said to me in the reading. It was quite amazing. Yeah, I think that can be the case, actually. You know, I think what you're interested in is often what you brought forward.
Medieval times, and you might have a connection with that, and castles. And that, and it might be that's what your link is. You're attracted from a past memory in a past life.
There's just another one coming in. Thanks guys for not chatting between yourselves. It's helpful. Question: will the Native American population grow again? There are lots of Native Americans still being killed in ways.
Okay, that's kind of a bit off topic, but funnily enough, not off topic in another way, because a lot of the mediums in spiritualism, and me too, and I don't know if you do too, Jane, but we talk about our spirit guides, and the American Indians took on the role of mediators between the two worlds, because they were a civilization that was about to be wiped out, a highly spiritually advanced civilization, and yet they according to what the spiritualist connections have had, many mediums have had helpers in the spirit world that are American Indians, Native Americans or American Indians. Wrong word, isn't it? Now we call them Native Americans. But anyway, so they decided to help mankind and live in between the two worlds, to live between the next world and this world and be helpers of mankind. So maybe that was the destiny of that nation of people, you know, that the Indian nation was to become a spiritual force for the world, but in a hidden way.
Well, they used to do a dance, didn't they, and praise Mother Earth, and they're very powerful, and the songs were very powerful.
The ghost dance that was.
No, the powwow, where they praised Mother Earth, and also when they went into teepees, swept teepees and that, they were very sort of advanced, and they had dreams and that, and they smoked the peace pipe and everything. So it's no coincidence, I suppose, that some of them, because they knew there's an afterlife, would come back to certain people. But they're one of many, Craig.
Yeah, but I think they took a specific role to help mediums, because so many mediums have the help. We might be that the actual fact that we got such powerful mediumship might be a lot down to the Native Americans that have helped mankind through mediums and collectively work together to help people. Because I mean, I've got an American Indian, and I thought to me that seemed daft, because it sounded so typical of, you know, blithe spirit type of thing. But you know, it is the case. And maybe they take a form that's like that. Maybe it's their spirit people that take a form. But I think they had a special role. And although
so that lineage, again, coming back to the idea of an ancestry and lineage, it continues as a lineage of the spirit, you know, and I think that's very interesting.
I used to have a witch doctor guy when I was very young, and he used to throw bones, tell fortunes and things. I can remember going on a ward, and there was a charge nurse said, "I see you brought your spirit guide with you, a witch doctor," and it's like coming out of a psychic closet, one could say. He was only with me for a few years.
Another interesting one here. Iceland has a wild historic past with Christianity and pagan traditions worth a read. And I should say so. One of my books was translated into Icelandic, I say proudly, and I went over there to talk on Icelandic television years ago, and I was amazed that so many Icelandic people were really deeply into the old ways.
It's good.
They believed in the spirits of the valley. They believed in the sagas, and they took the sagas on an almost literal level. They were really not, these were not just stories. These were our land. These lived in the landscape. And when we were going around there, they used to say things like, "Oh, this is where the such and such spirit is, and that corner there is protected by this spirit, and so and so, so and so." And I was taking it all in, but I thought, well, it's just, how can we prove all this type of thing? And then when I left to go to the airport, the taxi came at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was a bit sort of groggy from it and that. Packed my bags and off we go. And on the way to the airport, on this corner where they said the protective spirit is that helps you, I saw this sort of ogre-like figure pointing back to the hotel like this, going like this, and it wasn't a man. I thought, what the hell is that? It seemed like somebody in fancy dress or something weird. And then I suddenly thought, hey, I've left my suit in the hotel. Quick, taxi driver, turn around, I've got to go back. I've left that and the passport at the hotel. So we had to turn around and go back. So the spirit that we were saying hello to every time we went past, we'd say, "Bless the spirit as you go past." I saw the thing stood there. It was early in the morning. I was tired. Maybe people could say it was some hallucination, but no, for me, it was solid. So those old spirits of Iceland, they are definitely out there. I'm sure they are.
And the Aborigines were very clever people, because they used to put their ear to the earth and they could sense Mother Nature and what was going to happen. And it would be terrible if all these particular nations, like the Aborigines, North American Indians, Rishis, and that was suddenly wiped out.
Well, the problem is all the traditions of the world are getting wiped out by, I suppose you could call it, the Americanization of the world. It's not America's fault. It's just the way, the Britishization of the world even as well, because everything's getting watered down now, isn't it? Everybody's on, even when I go to India, there's people on there, the priests are doing their chants and they got their iPhones there at the same time. I think that kind of destroys the mystery a bit, and Aborigines and the rest of all the nations of the world are losing that connection and that connectedness. And we all are, aren't we? We're all losing our connectedness with individuals and society and groups of friends and even with our nations and our energies.
You don't get many mediums say they've got Eskimo guides, do you?
Oh, I've had some weird ones. I've had a few weird ones from people. Atlantean guides usually, well, I mean, I've had some daft people. I mean, see, spiritualism, God bless it, has a lot of good stuff, but my God, doesn't it have some wacky people in there sometimes too? Some of the things that people say, I just, I don't know. And you think the message I had the other day from someone. That's all they gave me. Red washing up gloves. That's your evidence. Thank you very much. It's so sad that spiritualism's lost it. But anyway, another one coming up here. It says, my husband could physically feel being stabbed in the solar plexus area if they did that in a movie. You're responding to someone, you're chatting. You shouldn't. He had a hernia repair in the same place. He felt a strong link to the Culloden battlefield. So I presume you're talking about some connection with place there. Please put a Q in front of your question like this lady's done. It's great, Joe. Thank you. My grandfather died at the age of 40. My dad died at the age of 41. My brother died at the age of 30. Could this be karmic or just a sad genetic situation?
Might be karmic.
Well, it could be either, couldn't it? You couldn't answer that, really.
Because you need to know if they had heart conditions in the family that went right back.
But there's another thing about the time of death that I think is quite important, because I mean, a lot of my interest in past lives, particularly, was triggered even more when I got involved in the Naadis, as I talk about a lot. One of the things in there said about the past lives, and you clear your karma. And when you clear the karma from that past life, then I went on and then had other Naadi readings, had 4 or 5 from loads of different readers around India. And what was happening was every time I did these rituals and things, I see a completely different reader who had no connection with the other people whatsoever. And he said, well, you've had a Naadi done before, and it told you this, this, and this. It said in the Naadi, and you said you would die at this age, but now you've actually cleared that karma and you're going to die much later at this age. And it's gone from 75 to 85 to 98 to whenever I want.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Yeah, so I'm going to be
dear.
around a long time. Watch it. But so what it makes me think is that our time of death might be determined a lot by our karma action from the past, and we can clear that karma through ritual and pujas and things, which the Indian system does, but also they say to do a particularly good astrologically important times, but to do good actions, to feed people particularly. Planting trees is supposed to be very good. Helping temples is very good. Yeah. Well, feeding, that is a good action. That helps, that extends your life. The good you do to others extends your life. So I think therefore, Joanne, that don't worry about whether it's genetic or whether it's spiritual. Do good actions. You want to live a long time, do good actions in the world. If you get a greedy person, you get greedy for money, for example, you want to take things off other people, that sort of selfishness that infiltrates a lot of people. If you're like that, what happens is you get ill, because you bring bad karma upon yourself. But if you do good actions, you do good thoughts as well, which are all equally as important. You do good mantras and things can also be, or prayers can also be things that help others or for others. Those things also help you get better too. So it's the best thing you can do for yourself. As I was saying there about the American native population have a tragic history, particularly after 1876. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever read "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee." What a brilliant book! That horrifying story of what happened there. Actually, it was it's interesting. Here, a question. I haven't read it. I'm going to look at it now. Some say there are a large number of Rh negative blood who have lots of psychic abilities. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm Rhesus negative, Craig, and they say that comes from there's very rare blood. You're Rhesus positive, and our blood groups don't mix. But a lot of people, I don't know how they say this, they say, oh, then you must have come from aliens. I've heard that. But I think what it is, and once again, going with our ancestors and things like this, it might be something in the DNA that's made that happen, because Rhesus blood, they used to say, came originally from monkeys, Rhesus monkeys, didn't they? So if you're Rhesus negative and you have a child, or expecting a child, and you're Rhesus negative, your antibodies in your body will attack that baby, thinking you're under attack with a virus and things like that. But remember, I had a special injection, don't I?
Yeah, I think there's another thing when we think about our ancestry again, that we assume we're all humans, but there are many types of humans that walked the earth before, including the Neanderthals, who interbred with the Homo sapiens or whatever. And we some of us carry, well, all of us carry a mix of genetics from different strains. And they reckon it was the Neanderthals, I think they must be meant to be the Neanderthal man who died out. Actually, they were the intelligent ones. Our intelligence comes from those genes, some say. And that's what triggered human evolution. So, you know, I'm sure if we were to really know who we are, we'd be more than surprised, particularly when we start to unravel the story of human evolution. I mean, they say that humans originally they talk about evolution from monkeys and things, but even before that, they were pig-like creatures. So who knows who we were and what we are? You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? So we're coming to the end. Let's take one last question from you guys. I see you've got. Let's go.
Well, lots of questions. Sorry, I should have put more up. But you're chatting, and that makes it difficult for me to put a queue in front so I can see who says what. Just one last question thing about mediumship there. I think that was a comment on when we were talking about it. Mediumship definitely gives people the validation they need, and in turn helps bring peace to that person.
Yes,
It's very true, isn't it, really? Yeah. I think you and I do a lot of work with spiritual work and things like that, don't we? I mean, we love doing our spiritual work, but I think the mediumistic is really what is the most important part of what we do, don't you think?
Well, especially when somebody's tragically lost a child that's been stabbed. We've got lots of stabbing has happened, and that child comes through and gives evidence and saying, "Dad, you put my trainers on my coffin." And it might be a little thing like that. That's true. Now, how would that person know and give me that evidence if my son hadn't given that evidence?
Yeah, I think sometimes the spirit world also I feel sometimes they almost want to prove it to me too, because sometimes you start doing readings for people and you'll say, my Zoom readings are for mediumship only, and everybody ignores that and they come in and ask about every ordinary life situations. And then sometimes you get someone that really genuinely comes for proper mediumship, and the amazing level of evidence that comes through sometimes. And I think they've also proven it to me, just what a remarkable thing it is, because once the channel's open, you say things that they sound bonkers, don't they? They sound crazy. That one the other night, I was amazed at I said the woman came, so this woman spent her life in an iron lung. How many people spent their life in an iron lung? All through her life, and it was how she'd survived and laughed about it, and was still a lovely energy. That and so many other little things that really are those bits of evidence are
I think
precious.
also it's been proven when they've taken scans of people's brains are suddenly linked up to psychic things, are the neurons in the brain suddenly all change.
Yeah, well, I think one day it would be very interesting to do PET scans on the brain whilst mediumship's taking place, because what is happening, how do our brain patterns change? They must change pretty radically. Because if the spirit world puts an imprint of their spirit on ours, it must affect how I'm thinking, because it's like you get memories that you feel that are yours, but they're not yours, they're someone else's, and then you express it, and that's the memory of what the spirit world is telling somebody. So they must have to impress their thoughts on our thoughts. And I wonder whether a PET scan or something more perhaps developed as time goes on, as we start to learn how the brain thinks and can watch how the brain thinks, we might be able to see how the brain picks up or also reflects each other.
Somebody in the future might absolutely say where consciousness is. Might be proven, because nobody knows.
Well, there's no consciousness in the brain. The consciousness lies in the spirit.
Nobody knows, because you must have consciousness in the brain.
It's not generated by the brain.
They must know where it exists and where it is. Nobody's proven that yet.
Yeah, but the conduit of consciousness, this physical body is just an overcoat. A very nice one in my case. And with that,
well, that's your opinion, my dear.
Anyway, guys, thanks ever so much for joining us. We're going to say goodbye now.
Bye. I'll let them talk.
Yeah. We'll see you all again next time.
Ciao.
Bye for now.
Yes, and my idea is to have certain very highly spiritual people that will come into these centres, and it'd be like nothing's been done before, and it'd be quite unique, quite beautiful, and like Craig says, it'd be done on, I will want to do it on a high spec. So it's really lovely that people have something to look forward to. And you don't have to be any particular religion. The religion I believe in is love all, serve all.
Yeah, and we've already got a number of people that have expressed an interest in trying to help us. And if those people can start, if you start getting inspired by the shows that you watch every week here and start thinking a bit bigger picture, we can do something between us. It's not about me and Jane, it's about all of us. It's about all of us in these really dark times, because those that have come to the show know that with what we're trying to do, we're trying to raise enough funds first to keep this studio going, because this is all coming from the patrons. This is all your donations that's helping us to keep this studio going. And if you like the show, you give a little donation. And also, we're trying to take it to the next stage. We're trying to become a full spiritual centre.
I have a dream, for example, Craig, just an example, of having like a meditation room, and in the centre of the meditation room, a beautiful crystal fountain with cushions around, and possibly lovely Indian music and lovely night lights, so it gets us all into a deep meditative state and be very beautiful. And then the next room, Craig and I can demonstrate, and perhaps another room where I have healers in that can help people. And another room, obviously, we'd like to feed people as well, and make it really, really beautiful. That's my vision, Craig.